Hello everyone and welcome to chapter number 5 of Blender Master Course series Objects in 3D View Editor. Do watch the previous 5 chapters of this series and the link of these are there in the pinned comment, so do check them out if you haven't watched them yet. Now the most important thing in our 3D View Editor is this 3D cursor here. So while working in the 3D viewport there are two cursors, the mouse cursor which I am moving right now and the 3D cursor which is by default located at the center of the scene. And before understanding the usage of this 3D cursor, it's important to understand selecting, deselecting and adding objects in your 3D view editor or your file. So in this default Blender scene, the cube is selected as it's shown by this orange outline or this yellow outline here. And to deselect it, click left mouse button anywhere in the empty space. And to select it again, click left mouse button on the cube. And as discussed earlier also, the shortcut key for selecting all the objects in your 3D view editor is to press A and all the objects would get selected. An alternative selection method is the box selection method, and for this I'll first deselect these objects and now I'll press B on my keyboard. Now left click and drag it like this, and to finalize the selection I will release the left mouse button click, and now only the cube is selected since it lied within the box area. Now whenever you open Blender, then by default this select box tool here is activated in the tools panel. So basically this tool is similar to what we learnt in box selection method. With this selected, you can click left mouse button and then drag it like this, and if you release it, then this will select all the objects that lie in the particular box area. And if you keep your cursor on this tool and keep holding your left mouse button, then you will see a list of 4 options. If we select the tweak option here, then it basically allows you to select only by clicking on a particular object using your left mouse button. For example, if I click on this camera here, then this camera will get selected. If I click on this cube, the cube will get selected. Now the next option available here is the select box tool, which we have already discussed, and it basically allows you to make a box and any object within the box area will get selected. Now the next one is the select circle method, and in this case the mouse cursor turns to a selection circle, and in order to select an object using this, for example this camera, make sure that the entire object is within this circle area, and for this I will scroll my middle mouse button to make sure that the camera lies within the circle area, and then I'll click my left mouse button to finalize the selection and the camera will get selected. And the last one is the select lasso tool, and it basically allows you to create a lasso area like this, and any object that lies within the area will get selected. If I try to select this lamp will get selected, and if I try to select this cube, then this cube will get selected. Now our next topic for today is adding objects in Blender. So by default, Blender scene contains 3 objects, a cube, a camera and a light. And the camera and the light are the special objects which perform their functions, but when you actually render your image, they do not appear because camera takes the image and the light adds 3D lighting effect to your scene. Now if you want to add a new object in Blender, press Shift plus A and select the mesh list. Then you can see a list of 10 mesh objects which are called primitives in Blender because they allow you to basically create any model out of them by resizing them, by scaling them and doing other operations. Suppose I select this cylinder here. Now the cylinder will get added where my 3D cursor is within the scene. And if you want to change the location of your 3D cursor, you basically have 2 options. First one is to select this tool which is known as the cursor tool from here. And now if you click your left mouse button anywhere, then the cursor will get relocated. And another way is to hold shift and click right mouse button anywhere to position the 3D cursor on your viewport. Also there is one more way to change the location of your 3D cursor. If you press shift plus S, then this cursor pie menu appears, and it basically allows you to snap your 3D cursor to some particular locations. We will be using all these in the upcoming chapters while modeling things practically. But for now, I'll take an example by taking my cursor back to the world origin, and for this I'll click on this cursor to world origin option, and my cursor gets relocated back to the world origin. Also Blender gives you the option to duplicate objects. Suppose I want to create a duplicate of this cylinder, so the shortcut key is Shift plus D, and then by dragging my cursor around I can move the duplicate object. Now if you want to move it in a particular direction, let's say X axis, then I'll press X on my keyboard and its movement will get restricted to the X axis. And suppose I type a number like 5 in my keyboard, then it will move exactly by 5 meters in the X axis. And to finalize, you can click either enter, or another option is to click left mouse button. Both of them work. In order to move an object, let's say this cube in our scene, then one way as we discussed in our previous chapters was to press G on our keyboard and then move around the cube. But there's another way as well, and that is by using the object properties panel here. So you can change the location of your selected object by entering different values here. Suppose I type 1.5 meters in Z direction, then it will move in the required location. Similarly, if I type 3 in Y direction, then it will move by 3 meters in the Y direction. And instead of entering the values here, you can also click left mouse button and then drag like this, and the object will relocate as per the values. And to finalize it, you need to release your left mouse button. Similarly, you can also rotate or scale your object from here in a particular direction. Also, there are many people who are not comfortable with the metric system and they follow the imperial system more. So for such people, you can go to scene properties here and then click on units, and you can change from metric to imperial from here. And I'm choosing the metric system since I'm more comfortable with that. Now you might have noticed that when you press Shift A, then apart from mesh, there were many more object types here. So we'll be understanding almost all of them in our future chapters whenever they are required to be used. Now coming back to the topic, these objects in our scene have different names assigned to them, which you can check from here in the outline editor. For example, the selected object is named cube, and this cylinder, this is named as cylinder in the outline editor, and since this one was the duplicate of this cylinder, so it's named as cylinder.001. Similarly, if I create another duplicate out of it, then that duplicate will be named as cylinder.002. Also, you can rename any of these objects by double clicking here and then typing the name, for example cylinder duplicate, and then press enter to confirm the name. Similarly, let's change the name of this cube and let's name it box. And now I'll delete all these objects, and now I'll add a special object in Blender, that is the Suzanne or the monkey model. The reason why Blender has this complex model in a list of all simple looking models is that most 3D softwares have a generic semi-complex primitive that they use for testing renders and other things in their software, and they can't do this with a simple cube or a simple sphere. So they need something more complex, and that's why Blender added this Suzanne or this monkey model in this software. The next thing that we will see is joining two or more objects together, and for that let's add a cube here. Let's move it in X direction, and we'll also add a UV sphere and let's move it in X direction like this. Now suppose I want to join all these together as a single object, so for that I'll select all these by pressing A and then press Ctrl plus J to join them. Now they will appear as a single object here in the outliner editor, and if you wish to undo the action, then you have to press Ctrl plus Z and this will undo your last action. And if you want to redo any action in Blender, then you have to press Ctrl plus Shift plus Z. Now I'll delete this and we'll add a UV sphere. We can notice that its surface is not smooth and is made up of rectangular flat surfaces. If you want its surface to be smooth, then you can do this by clicking right mouse button and selecting Shade Smooth. This produces a smooth spherical surface which looks better than the previous one. Also, if you want the surface to be flat, then you can do this by clicking right mouse button and going for the Shade Flat option. And now the last and the most interesting topic of this chapter is meta shapes. So first I'll delete this UV sphere and press Shift plus A, and in the meta ball section I'll select the ball. So meta shapes are described as clay-like forms having a rounded shape, and the reason why they are special is that they show some strange behavior when they get close to one another. So first I'll move it in X direction like this, and now I'll add another meta ball. And if I try to move it closer to the other one, then they try to pull and flow together like liquid droplets. And to finalize the structure, you have to click left mouse button. Also similar is the case with other meta ball objects such as the meta ball cube. If we add it and scale this down and move it in Z direction, and if you bring it close to any of the meta balls, then it will also behave in a similar way. So with the help of these meta shapes, we can create some very good effects by animating and texturing them, but that would be covered in our future chapters. So now we have learnt and understood lots of tools in the 3D view editor and different types of objects, and so it's time for a practical session in order to apply our knowledge practically. In the first practical session of chapter number 2 of this series, we made this Rubik's Cube, and in today's session we will be making this simple scene of a table. So to begin with, I'll first add a cube and we'll scale it down in the Z direction like this. I'll move it in the Z direction. Now we'll scale it up in X and a little bit in Y as well. So it looks like this, and it looks good as a tabletop. Now for the next part, I'll place my 3D cursor over here by pressing Shift plus right mouse button, and now I'll add a cube here. To make it look like a table leg, I'll first scale it up in Z direction, and now we need to scale this down in both X and Y directions simultaneously. And the shortcut key to scale it in two directions, say X and Y simultaneously, is to press S then shift plus the other direction, that is Z. So by using this shortcut we can scale this down in two directions simultaneously. And to finalize the scaling we have to click left mouse button. Now we'll also scale this down in the Z direction like this, and we'll move it down in Z direction also. So it looks fine now. And instead of making all the legs separately, we will duplicate this leg by pressing shift plus D, and now I'll move it in Y direction and we should place it here. Similarly, we will select both these legs and we'll duplicate them and we'll place them here on the other side of the table. So this looks good, and now I'll move this table down like this, and I'll make it into a single object by joining it. So I'll press Ctrl plus J, and now this is converted into a single object, and I'll change its name from here. I'll rename it as table. Now I think that we should place the Suzanne model on this table so that it doesn't look empty. And so I'll first place my 3D cursor here on the tabletop so that the object gets added here. And now I'll press shift plus A and select mesh, then monkey or the Suzanne model. And now I'll resize it and place it on the tabletop. And it's also not mandatory to copy the exact location or the rotation that I am doing. You can do it on your own as per your preferences. And it looks complete now, and it's time to render it. But before that I have to add a camera in my scene. So I'll press shift plus A and I'll press camera here. Now if I press 0 on my numpad for the camera view, we notice that we don't see the table. That's because the camera is located where the 3D cursor was. And the best way to fix this is to select view here and then click on lock camera to view. It basically allows you to view navigation within the camera view, meaning that if you scroll down, then you will zoom out in the camera view as well. And similarly, if you press your middle mouse button and navigate, then your camera will also move. But if this option is disabled, then if you try to navigate, then the camera would remain still. So it's important to turn this on if you want to navigate with your camera view. And now I'll scroll down so that the entire table is visible like this. Before rendering, let's assign the table and the Suzanne model some colors. So I click on the table and I'll go to the materials tab. Then I'll click on new and I'll change the color, but first I'll go to the material preview mode, and now I'll change the color to something like brown. I'll decrease this brightness slider and I'll change the color of the Suzanne model to yellow. Now I'll go to the render preview mode and I see that there is no lighting, so I need to add lights also. I'll press shift plus A and select light, then point, and here the light will get added at the 3D cursor. I'll move it up in Z direction and I'll switch this off, the lock camera to view option, so that I can navigate properly. Then I'll select this light and move it in Y direction and down in Z direction. I'll increase its power from here. Let's set it to 50 watt. And I'll also increase the brightness or the power of the light. Also I'll add one more light by duplicating it, shift D, and I'll move it in Y direction. Now I'll return to the camera view, and if I zoom in, although this looks very simple, but with the amount of knowledge we are having right now, it looks decent enough to render. So now we'll click on render, then render image, and so this is the final rendered image. If you also tried making it, then do tell me in the comment section how it was. And that's all for this chapter. Our next lecture is gonna be of chapter number 6, editing objects in Blender. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and press that notification bell so that you can get timely updates about the upcoming chapters. Thank you for watching and we'll see you in the next one.